Rarely.
Hi. How are you?
I think my picture is it looks kind of like one of those I don't know, kind of slightly emo era late thousands punk rock cover albums. But this is in honor of it's from Oxford when I was there, and Avery was there 3 years ago now.
Okay.
So unfortunately, Avery won't be joining us this time, but we'll probably do some virtual element for plot twister stuff.
Okay.
It's a busy week of just like trying to get ready for everything that's coming up. So yeah. Yeah. So for today, let's see. For today, we can do the Irruption Theory stuff, and also like if we have an easy resting stop at around 9:30, I might limit it to an hour, but it probably will stretch on anyway. We'll see. I think this paper will be kind of. We could maybe even do it all today because it's not a tremendous amount of things, but if we take our time, we probably could do it like two versions of it because it's basically half the paper is just critiques of which I'm not sharing my screen yet. It's just critiques of of all this stuff of it's kind of situating current stuff in enactive theories and in cognitive science, and then the last bit is sort of his contribution and his framing. So yeah, well, any general updates before we begin? I have a few. I don't know. I know Amanda mentioned some stuff, but I don't know if anyone else wants to say anything before we dive into things today. I'll look quickly, and there's some interesting things in the Cognition Future Slack. But yeah, also, I mean, my updates are basically been a very busy April with a somewhat unexpected trip abroad, but I'm happy to do that too. I'm looking forward to being able to network and connect with people there at the event, which is the Sheridan Inclusive Gaming Conference. I think I've shared it a bunch of times by now. We have basically like a 15-minute presentation, basically mostly just giving an update on how we have done what we've been doing to make it inclusive and make it different. There's also a nice we were actually featured in this piece by IDEO because they kind of did the challenge that we Plotches was the grand prize, one of the grand prize winners of, and we're kind of featured in here towards the third principle about like I don't know, focus on feelings. We have plot twister stuff here, and I just put that out on like we reshared that on some of the social media around that stuff. And it's nice because a lot of the things that actually came up in this article, which was written by IDEO and not us in January, fit very well with this. So we'll basically be talking on how some of the design challenges and how we're running plot twisters in general to be maybe more inclusive, but also like the actual practices at a design level and how we're treating each other and how we're attempting to make games in maybe a new way or a different way. So that should be fun. And there's also some things at Oxford specifically I want to check out and I'll report back on. So if there's anybody there, I know I never really followed up with you, Morgan, last week about I'll make a note in Slack about that now, about like people to talk to there, basically. So uh, I'll follow up on that after this. Just
Sure thing.
because I'll be in the area. So that's pretty much for me. I have this is just something I'll get at in there because I don't quite know if it relates, but it's an interesting comment that I saw on one of his Twitter posts for a more recent paper. This one's was published in 2023.
Yeah.
But there's some newer stuff. But I don't know if you want to say anything about Daniel Dennett. I know you mentioned that elsewhere, but I don't know if you want to say anything now.
So yeah, Daniel Dennett died, I think, this past week,
Mm-hmm.
or I can't remember the date. But basically, since he died, people have been putting out a lot of In Memoriam stuff. So I'm making a collection of it in a folder, and I shared it in the Cognition Futures Slack channel. So I'm not done yet. I'm still. I mean, if you have anything you see and you want to put it in there, there's like a Word document or a Google Doc for the links, to different pieces if they're blog posts or something. And then I also put in Darwin's Dangerous Idea, the book, and some other papers. Apparently, he also published a book with Douglas Hofstadter called The Mind's Eye. That was like for about 45 years ago. So, but it's just interesting to kind of assemble that stuff. And, it's kind of hard to summarize everything that he did in his life. But it was he had a really interesting life, and he touched a lot of areas, both in philosophy and in other places as well. So it was definitely.
I'm pretty sure Levin put out a post as well about him. Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't access it. Could you make a PDF of that and put it in the folder, or at least post it in the Slack? Because I haven't been able to access anything on that blog.
Really? I wonder why. Maybe it's a subscription thing. But
are you subscribed?
I mean, I think I might have joined his email list or something from there, but I didn't not pay anything for it.
Every time I try to go to the URL of thoughtforms.life, I can't get to it. So.
Yeah, I'll do that. It looks kind of just to be a personal retrospective, and I guess he spoke at his lab recently.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Yeah, we did a review of an article, like a popular science article they wrote about cognition all the way down. It was a while back in one of the meetings, but so I mean they were, of course they were both at Tufts, so But yeah, I mean that's just I don't have much more to say. I never met him in real life, so I don't know.
Okay, yeah, I've seen a bunch of retrospectives and a bunch of feelings and a bunch of things and a bunch of stuff, and I feel like Dennett's always been, and I even remember, I think I'm like, I remember Tony Sciamaro talking about Dennett and his sort of, differences about things, but I feel like Dennett's always like one of the bigger names that I've never really dived deeply into. I don't remember if Amanda, you talked about Dennett before or not. I don't think so.
I've definitely mentioned The Mind's Eye. That's a really neat book. Otherwise, I remember reading Dennett in my introductory philosophy of mind class, and I got this kind of surface level. And then the surface that I encountered, I didn't really like, so I didn't keep exploring. I remember, if I remember correctly, he's like an illusionist, or I don't know what the right word would be, about consciousness. Like consciousness it only seems like we're conscious, would be the short version. But then the short version of the response from my philosophy of mind class is like, oh, well, isn't the seeming, an aspect of consciousness? So if it seems like we're conscious, then we are, it logically follows. And that's basically all I know about Dennett off the top of my head.
Yeah. I know he was a compatibilist in the free will debate. So it's kind of like, and
Mhm.
people often characterize that as sort of the no free will position, but it's not. It's like there's a lot of nuance there. So he had a lot of nuanced sort of takes, a lot of interesting takes on things, and so I mean, it was like definitely though enough people really thought his work was something to reflect on, and of course, yeah.
I would personally, I, it's been, everybody has everybody has their critics and their fans to some extent, but it's been nice. I think it's sort of a Cartesian theater.
Yeah, that's another thing I remember about him,
Oh, okay.
which is like maybe like the kind of thing that Fuchs was criticizing.
Okay.
Yeah, just like there was a different philosopher that Fuchs was talking about, but yeah, this is the only other thing I really remember about Dennett.
So, interesting. That's something to think about. What I was going to say is it's been nice to see all. He apparently had a positive impact on many people too.
Oh, yeah.
It's always nice. Like I think I have a soft spot for like well, not soft spot, but I generally appreciate like when people have good stories to tell about this stuff. And I would personally love to be, later in life or esteemed enough to be able to write in papers one a bit. And I'll eat my hat as just like things you can just like throw out at people and like be taken seriously to say that. So
well, it was kind of like more contentious view, contentious sort of thing,
Yeah. Oh, interesting. That's interesting. Peter Godfrey Smith does some other things that I like. He's like the Theory and Reality book about history of science I really liked was him too. I think he's also the Octopus guy or something like that.
Yes, I was just trying to say.
So this is a cool little post. Yeah. I'll make a version of this you can access and send the links and stuff like that too.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Okay. Anything else about this before we switch to the main topic? I don't have any project updates right now. Maybe I could just it'll be easier to do here. I think in a lot of ways this is going to be sort of our reference point here. Will be this. I'll pull this up a bit some. And like I don't know how much people are going to want to go into all the details of the paper because like I think over half of it is just situating it relative to stuff that we somewhat know. But I haven't read the paper in the middle of it enough to know if this applies. But this is an interesting comment. Where did it go? Maybe this was the top one, I guess. But this is not of the current paper. So this is for this more recent paper. And I'm just curious if we'll come across it here because it's based, this one says, criticism using traditional terminology of the mind-body debate will confuse some folks. I'm intrigued with your work as moving us towards a science of embodied agency and subjectivity. Thanks, you're right about the return to more traditional terminology, but it's strategic because it's the sharpest conceptual formulation. A lot of contemporary work ignores the old debates, it becomes fuzzy instead. And I guess we'll see if that applies in this paper too or not. I don't know. But that said, that's pretty much, get this out of the way. That's all the priming for this. And I guess we can start here. So, a novel conceptualization of the enactive account of motivated activity. I guess the first question I have, I think motivated activity is a very specific thing, and I don't really know much about it. But as Amanda or Bradley, have you have anything to say about that? I guess, or we'll find out here.
I think a good starting place is like intentional, like on purpose for reasons. I don't remember. I read this so quickly. I don't remember how exactly they spell it out here, but I think like the short version is like goal directed, and the agent is like exercising its will, as opposed to like habitual unconscious, like passive.
So this is just the sort of the division in terms of all behaviors that are generated, or is this like arguing that that's the dominant mode of behavior?
I believe it has to do with a subset of things, and I think what I'm going to do is basically, I would think, like for the sake of getting everything here, we can go to the abstract, and then I'm not sure. Well, it's pretty swift. So we'll just go to the abstract introduction, and then I think maybe jump to the conclusion.
The first sentence of the introduction answers our question.
What is it? I don't know.
What is action? Okay.
Well, action is a mix of those things, though. Like you can have reflexive behaviors, you can have, autonomic behaviors, and then you can also have intentional behaviors as part of that.
Yeah, and I think the the divide here is the happenings in this way of it. It's the action, and in this case, an action or maybe a motivated action is the doing by an agent rather than a physical happening, perhaps.
You're right. He's saying action is specifically this motivated kind of thing. There's no like unmotivated action, which that's consistent with how philosophers of action talk. Like behavior, like passive habitual behavior, wouldn't really count as action.
Oh, okay. Do you remember when we talked about the dopamine debate in neuroscience a while back in the Saturday meetings? So like there's this whole, like, I guess there are different schools of thought about dopamine. I mean, sometimes you get people who sort of the more popular view, maybe it's pop psychology view, of dopamine being like this thing that motivates people, and it's like this you can almost say just that motivated reasoning or motivated action is just dopamine driven, and you can like actually say, assign the amount of dopamine to a certain behavior. I mean, that's not really the way it works, but that's the way some people kind of approach it. But then like some of the other papers that have come out, especially recently, kind of they kind of muddy the waters on that quite a bit. So it's not clear exactly what the motivational circuit is necessarily. I mean, we can say like, and this goes back to like, behavioral psychology, where people would say like, you're motivated to do something, there's a positive feedback, and it leads to a more motivated activity and all that, which, is maybe an appealing model, but it's not necessarily straightforward. So, I mean, my point here being is that I don't know, we're using a lot of words to sort of maybe get at an idea that's not necessarily the case or clear. And I know it's easy to make a nice, neat sort of description of reasoning and motivation, but it's not as simple as that, maybe.
Yeah, I think an example of the proliferation of like dopamine content in pop sci is now like if you scroll on social media to say like follow me or I am your dopamine because I am the account that is going to follow, which is sort of
Well,
Anyway.
I want to make sure that if you just say this is motivated, this is passive behavior, that we're actually identifying the right mechanism for the right thing. Like we're just not throwing things in a basket because that's what that fits our hypothesis.
Yeah, and I think your caution about that is sort of I'm really curious how that plays out in this paper and how much like if we decide to go down that road in the future, like what will, for example, this more recent paper get into, because this was the one that was released like when he did his first public talking about it. But I guess we'll see if we want to go there. But to wade through this, so cognitive science is lacking conceptual tools to describe motivation, how motivation can play a role in the generation of its behavior. Just a little bit, zoom in a bit more. Okay, sure. Here we go. Enactive approach has made progress by developing a relaxed naturalism and placing normativity at the core of life and mind. All cognitive activity is kind of motivated activity. It has rejected representational architectures, that it means the enactive approach, I guess, especially the reification of the role of normativity into localized value functions in favor of accounts that appeal to system-level properties of the organism. However, these accounts push the problem of reification to higher-level descriptions, given that the efficacy of agent-level normativity is completely identified with the efficacy, of non-normative system-level activity, while assuming operational equivalency. To allow normativity to have its own efficacy, a new kind of non-reductive theory is proposed, eruption theory. The concept of eruption theory is introduced to indirectly authorize an agent's motivated involvement in activity, specifically in terms of corresponding underdetermination of its states by the material basis. This implies that eruptions are associated with increase in unpredictability of neurophysiological activity, and they should be hence quantifiable in terms of their information theory entropy. Accordingly, evidence of that action, cognition, and the consciousness are linked to higher levels of neural entropy can be interpreted as indicating higher levels of motivated agential involvement. I have to think about what that means to me here. Counterintuitively, eruptions do not stand in contrast to adaptive behavior, rather, as indicated by artificial life models of complex adaptive systems, bursts of arbitrary changes in neural activity can facilitate self-organization of activity. Eruption theory therefore makes it intelligible how an agent's motivations as such can make effective differences in their behaviors without requiring the agent to be able to directly control their body's neurophysiological processes. So, any comments on that so far?
Let's see. I don't know where to start here. Like just looking at this, the whole part about entropy that sounds interesting, and that's just uncertainties. This is information entropy, not thermodynamic entropy. So it's more about uncertainty. So greater amount of uncertainty you get. It's almost like kind of free energy-esque in a way.
Yeah, and to that end, I think I'll just try to take a picture of it here. One of the diagrams here is a little like, it's kind of like everything goes into everything a little bit. So I will come to this, but just to sort of collect it here.
So, yeah, this is a good figure to kind of go through. It's a lot in this figure here.
I think we'll come back to that, but just sort of like I'm really curious where I think at a really simple level, what sort of the things I'm seeing trying to be connected. I'm seeing, okay, we have this enactive approach. We have a problem with motivations. What we want to do is indirectly operationalize an agent's motivation, involvement, and activity material basis. I'm not really sure. Like, is this? I think he's saying I want to link something to the neural activity, and we're trying to link. Action, cognition, and conscious are linked to higher levels of neural entropy and can be interpreted by higher levels of motivated agental involvement. So, bursts of arbitrary changes in neural activity can facilitate self-organization of the activity. And it's saying this is part of complex adaptive system modeling in A-Life. Okay.
Well, what are the models? I wonder what he's referring to. I mean,
yeah,
that's a good question.
So we're kind of in the introduction, we've gone through this stuff about he's situating what motivation is. And I guess he's saying that it, put this here. So an illustrative contrast example to consider, consider that it makes no sense to attribute a failure to a river if it happened to run out of water. Yet it would make sense to attribute a failure to an animal's actions if it was unable to satisfy the need of water.
Failure to a river. So river being a structure that's sort of, there's this idea of dissipative structures, which is that a river, you have water going through a river channel, and it kind of creates a river, and then if it goes away, there's no more river. I mean, there's a signature of a river, but that's the thing that's driving the river. Riverness, I guess, is the category. So, let's see. And then it says, yet it would make sense to attribute a failure of an animal's actions if it was unable to satisfy its need of water. Which is like, what does that mean? I mean, failure to an animal's actions. I guess if it can't drink enough water, it dies as well. I don't know what that means.
I'm kind of getting a little bit of sort of maybe a similar idea to like cognitive light cone, but more like agential life cone, like the organism. Like I think it's trying to link the organism or the agent has motivated behavior insofar as here's a goal, which is also tough. Like I get the example of the a river is this example of something that doesn't have agency or motivation capacity, whereas this other thing does, but it's at this level of, it would be I think some of the more interesting things that's getting at this paper is there is sort of a pressure to do something by nature of existing. And I think it's trying to tie that somehow to all the stuff out here.
Well, I mean, it's not really the animal's fault if it can't find water. If there's no water, then that's not but that's not. I mean, that's not generally the way we think about it, though. I mean, it's like people aren't really worried. I mean, if you're an animal looking for water, you pick the most adaptive strategy, maybe, and even if that doesn't yield you water, then you die, and well, you tried. But that's. I mean, I don't know what exactly the point of that concept is. I'm no clearer on what's going on here.
Maybe what was meant is like if it were possible for the animal to get water and nevertheless it failed. Like if a similar member of the similar species could do it, but one animal like failed, then I kind of see what he's getting at. But that seems like a really important point, and you're right. That the animal and the river are in some cases like exactly the same case to me.
Yeah, almost like a Morris water maze thing. Like if you do some sort of testing and you test the animal to see if it could find a platform in the water, or else it didn't make it. You could say, well, is it the fault of the organism, or is it the fault of is there some sort of mental deficit that it has that it can't do it, or whatever. So I mean, that's not really. Yeah, I don't really understand the analogy really.
It's also it seems like there are ambiguous cases in between. Like, should the animal have been able to find the water? Like it seems like the answer in some cases could be like, well, maybe, or like it depends.
Yeah. I think I don't know how to make it a better thing, but I think what I sense is trying to be aimed at is that the thing about sort of I would almost say like necessity pressure. I don't know what that really is in other terms, but like there is something that I don't. My issue with it is more. It's sort of, it makes me go back to like even like Maturana stuff, and how like it has like there's a certain observer. It's in the role of the external observer to comment on the perceived like efficacy or strategy or intentions of something else. Like that's where that comes from, and I don't like my uncertainty about this is kind of okay, yes, we can ascribe a general thing that living things want to stay alive, sure, and therefore actions should be in line with that. But obviously, there's many examples where that's not the prime directive in the action of the agent, whether it's like sacrificial or negligent or just deterioration or whatever, things change. And this getting here to this next bit about like lived experience and ownership. This is my body, this is my moving. Only the former is associated with agency. I am moving my body, okay? Then in terms, therefore, we can define motivated activity as any embodied, okay. So motivated activity is any embodied activity that is directed at an end, including any activity that the agent performs because of a goal, belief, desire, feeling, thought, or any other reason. Although it's not our current focus, it actually includes all the regulatory activity of an organism. Interesting. It can be operationally characterized in general terms as follows. Intuitively, motivated activity is a particular kind of end-directed activity that is driven by the intrinsic preferences of the systems in question. I get that from a regulatory sense, I suppose. On this general view, we can also consider all cognitive activity studied by cognitive science as a kind of motivated activity. Okay. How do we account for this compared to mere happenings? Moreover, how can motivations make a difference to behavior? These are pressing questions. Our lived experience therefore adds to the challenge of how to account for motivated activity in such a way that our lived motivations as such can be understood as participating in the generation of the behavior. Okay. We leave the development of our account of our experiential dimension motivated activity as a topic for future work, but here we want to focus on the efficacy of motivated activity, and then below we review a lot of the enactive stuff, and then propose their new theory. So I mean, I'm not sure what to say about motivation yet, other than I think this is sort of a preparation of saying, okay, this lens of motivated activity, which is everything in, everything. Well, I forget what it is, but somewhere is like everything in cognitive science right now is motivated activity, and I think is trying to develop sort of a worldview shift with that somehow. But
yeah, this next part might be useful to go through because we do talk about enactivism, and we'd like to know how this fits into the enactive view.
Yeah, there's the majority of the paper, I think, is actually this. Is sort of two, 3, and 4 are all situating, and we'll get to the diagram, I guess, later. Bringing human experience to cognitive science, the enactive approach has been developing an influential account of motivated activity for over 2 decades. It started with revitalization of autopoietic theory as biology of intentionality. I'm really curious, what is this? Autopoiesis and Varela. Okay, sure. I wish I could just go back. Can I easily go back? Yes, thank you. Great, awesome. Then continued with the introduction of normative concepts from the philosophy of the organism, Kant stuff, and Jonah's notions, precariousness, and need for freedom. A common theme in the enactive approach is the autonomy of the living system. Biological autonomy is associated with the fact that the living system's systemic organization or form is actively maintained across time, while the matter instantiating the form is continuously replaced. Okay, that's autonomy, sure. Material self-production is understood as a minimal kind of motivated activity. And this is a quote from who? This is quoting Weber and Varela, saying, autonomy then is nothing other than true teleological behavior. This autonomy has to do with ever-existing gap between realization of the living and its underlying matter. There's always the possibility and final certainty of death. It's the existential situation that is emphasized by Jonas. Teleological circular self-referential movement to the living. Okay, it's relation between matter and perhaps something more than that.
So he's saying that, like, he's setting up this idea of autonomy, and then that's equivalent to teleology, because you have things that persist, or the form, whatever that means, while the components of the form change. And I guess, one thing, like one concrete example of that is like, synapses get formed and die off, but you basically retain the same memories. Now, we're not clear on what the actual, mechanisms for that are. It could be that the form is actually something other than the actual memories, so they get maintained by something other than the things that are being recycled, or maybe it doesn't matter so much what the form, and say form because it's kind of a sort of a general term, but like it doesn't matter necessarily which synapses are activated as long as there's some structure there to retain the information. I mean, a lot of the Levin experiments on flatworms and on the, we talked about like when caterpillars go into their cocoon and then they come out as butterflies, or they go into some hibernation and they retain memories. That might be some form of that, because they go through this transformative process of their phenotype. But I mean, it's hard to say unless you really put a concrete example on that. What exactly that means? I mean, it's like this division between the mind and the brain. So, what is the mind? Is it, does it involve the brain? Well, a lot of people would say yes. We don't really know how. There are parts of the brain that are recycled while we retain the basic structure of the mind. But of course, the brain is not that plastic. So I mean, something is being retained, and then the question is, what is that? So, I mean, I think he's getting a little too eager to go to teleology right away. I mean, I'd like to see some examples of this in the paper where we have a system we can see this kind of change in form, whatever that means, and then how that persists over time with things being replaced, material replacement. I mean, I know what maybe he's kind of getting at, but
yeah, I'm not super familiar with any of these like references about that.
I think those are hardcore philosophy references. But I don't know if Amanda has anything to say here. It might be useful.
No, I don't have anything useful.
Okay.
This poetic description was a key source of inspiration for the tradition of the theorizing that has led to contemporary enactive conception of life, citing Hollow, enactive conception of life. I lost the name. Okay. In short, this is because an organism metabolically brings about its own individual existence under conditions of precariousness that require continuous regulation with the internal and behavioral activity that features intrinsic perspective to which things matter in the first place. I think that's the name of Eric Hull's blog, is the intrinsic perspective, or someone's. Anyway, this autopoiesis activity ground the organism's intrinsically value-laden perspective on the world, which is referred to as process of sense-making. Okay, so I'm taking from this, like, there is, at the whole organism level, or life form, the form level, there's some autonomy that's directing, that has some action pressure to find value as the extent to which the situation affects the viability of self-sustaining and precarious process. Okay, we have a diagram coming up. And my computer's changing a little bit here. Much of the work in the Enactive approach is focused on how to account for its presence. Whoops, what is going on? Well, much less attention has been paid to how once present value could make a concrete difference to an organism's activity. Just adjust this here for a second. Okay. The new theory of motivated activity to be developed in this article. What is going on? Sorry, my selection is all strange here. Okay. Focus on this latter topic while taking the presence of motivation such as value for granted. So that's why it's skipping ahead to, not focus on that again. This has the advantage that the arguments do not depend on any specific account of the origin of motivations, which even opens the possibility that the argument could be deployed more widely than for the enactive approach that forms the current starting point. Thus, how should we do the role of the value? How should the role of this value in the organism's concerned perspective be conceptualized? As Duvallo and colleagues highlighted, in contrast to the standard approaches of cognitive neuroscience that tend to ratify this role as a value system in the brain with localized function, the enactive approach proposes a holistic system level role that shapes sense making with figure one. So
That's figure one. So let's go over figure one, yeah.
So it looks like distinct conceptualizations of value. And it looks like we have A is, I guess, it's in the, it's a value system embedded here, and then it's the whole deal. You can go through it.
Yeah. So this is, there is a popular class of cognitive architectures that would be on the left that generates reinforcement signals based on environmental states to guide the generation of behavior. So this is like a basic sort of reinforcement learning model, if you're familiar with that, or, this is like if you look in a cognitive psychology textbook, this is sort of like the idea, or maybe like a behavioral psychology textbook, this is kind of the way it's sketched out. So you have the world, which is perception. It goes into a value system. You learn from that. You get a behavior generating system, which is where the values feed into some behavioral system. Then you have the action perception loop, which is, of course, what he's referring to as activity. So, these motivation is, in this case, restricted to the action perception loop, this comparison. So that's, goal-directed by sort of the value system, but also through feedback. So you have this feedback, and learning modulates this. So if you're learning new things, if you're learning new, you're plugging it into that action perception loop, and it's modifying your behavior. And it's all very general because it's like, a model that's basically trying to extract a lot of, from a lot of different types of systems to this sort of ideal. Now in B, this is the enactive approach. So this is different from what you would find in the textbooks of those fields I mentioned. This is sort of an enactive, and this is value appraisal. So this is where you have the action perception loop, and you have these self-sustaining dynamical processes. I'm not sure where perception or information come into play, but the behavior generating system and the value system are sort of, I guess, sort of collapsed, and the learning process is within that dynamical process. So there's a feedback loop, which is action perception, and then this main thing. So this takes a holistic perspective on value as an aspect of all sense making. So there's sense making is inherent in generating behavior, which in turn is essentially an organism's evaluation of the consequences of its actions in the world for conservation of an identity. There's this idea of theory of motivations, and it's basically that you have these sort of very simple behavioral aspects to regulating behavior. So if you put your hand on a hot stove, you learn to take it off the hot stove. And then, you may associate that hot stove with like your hand being burnt. And that's kind of one way to do that. This is like saying that, there's this organisms evaluating its consequences in a little bit different way. If anyone else has any ideas about it?
I think the most, my little note here is, I get, and I don't know if we should go to the conclusion or not. Not to skip everything else in the paper, but more like the conclusion. I'm just going to kind of tease this right now, I guess, because whatever. I get that the point of this paper is basically making a really high level assertments that I think it basically fits. I think it even maybe is even explained. I'll pull this up over here. Maybe even this is sort of the core of the paper in some ways. But I think it's saying. I think this diagram is simply saying, okay, well, from A to B this is the advancement that a generic enactive model is taking. Okay. And then he's going to develop further in the paper. Well, here's how we're going to make it even better and more specific with these specific things, which I don't know yet how to feel about that. I haven't seen it. But what he's trying to get at is that sort of I use the term, I don't really know what I'm going to say it here, so I'm just going to go back up here. Sorry. I think there's sort of this argument of, I guess, scale. I don't really know if that's really the best term for this, but I think he's trying to say, okay, so like the really the great thing about enactivism, according to like what has been or whatnot, its advance was trying to scale this value system stuff as opposed to being this sort of the value part of the brain or whatever. That's a simplification, but this small component where the decision-making factor that where the values are stored and computed or whatever is now scaled to all the different processes. I think he's even trying to incorporate at the like the non-voluntary things too. Like there's some like the organ wants to regulate, the cell needs to maintain its whatever. Like its actions of homeostatic actions are part of this value being scaled to all the different parts of it. That's kind of my feeling, and I feel like where the paper is going is I think he's trying to justify why, like, is there another? I forget if there's another model. Like, okay, so there's a little squiggly self-optimization bit that's added here. So there's something between. So he's gonna get something between plasticity, agency, and self-optimization. I guess that's where we're gonna go with this. But I think right now, and I think what I'm gonna do in this diagram or whatever is just compare. We're gonna like see the evolution of the model side by side. I think that's gonna sort of tell the story a bit more clearly. But I guess right now it's just okay. Enactivism helps scale. At least I don't know if it's really the right word, or more like something about proportions or less discretely, like isolatedly doing this thing and changing it this way. I guess I don't know if that's what an activist would say. I don't feel like I have enough grasp to say that confident enough, but I feel like he's saying, yeah, this is kind of what happened, and this is where they haven't, the classic, they did great stuff, but not quite enough, and I want to make it better by going a little further in this direction. So, yeah. One subsequent development story here, excuse me, development is noteworthy here. In its initial formulations, life's precariousness was attributed to, which I think is a specific term within these, right? Attributed in an unspecific way to the ever-existing gap between the realization of the living and its underlying matter. The agency body problem as opposed to the mind body problem? I don't know. This idea was subsequently refined in the enactive conception of life in terms of the process of self-individualization. There is always already a primordial tension at the core of life between two opposite needs with respect to how an organism must relate to its environment, openness versus closedness, figure 2 below. The tension introduces an additional normative constraint, namely, for the living system to have the capacity to adaptively coordinate the partial satisfaction of the two opposing needs over time. Let's finish this paragraph here. Okay, over time.
So this is very much like the whole Robert Rosen thing and the paper we read last time in cybernetics reading group, the realization, or what do they call it? Realization, relevance realization.
Yeah, the yogi one. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I wonder if what he's citing in this case.
These ones here.
Well, I don't think that's it, but that's Di Paolo. Let's see,
9 and 10?
maybe 6, or maybe 9 and 10. I don't know. Probably just that whole block.
Clever, Morella, 6, 9, 10. They're all looks to be.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's probably a similar idea. It's just trying to figure out, like, it sounds very familiar to me. But
Yeah.
I'm also trying to figure out what this means, like openness versus closedness. Is he talking about thermodynamic openness versus closedness? Or is he talking about feedback loop openness versus closedness? Or, like there's this open-ended evolution, or what would be the opposite, be closed-ended evolution. So and we know that like open-ended evolution is basically where there's no real goal. It's just that things are kind of interacting and they end up in a certain place. And, that's sort of the secret sauce of adaptive systems, is that they're open. An argument to be made that sometimes systems are both open and closed depending on the context. So, you can have closure, you can have openness, and that leads to different processes. Sometimes, if you have closure at certain points, there might be a conservation of energy or conservation of entropy, but it's really, you can just kind of make things up at that point. But no, the Di Paolo stuff, I think that's worth kind of maybe looking into as well for some insights into this, because I think that's where they're kind of developing this from.
Yeah.
Yes. I think the description of this figure helped me understand what they mean by openness and closure.
Okay.
So, like you said, it seems like part of the way that an organism is adaptive is that there's a balance between openness and closure. And the part that helped this make sense to me is that maximizing either of these needs exclusively, either openness or closure, would lead to death, dissolution, and starvation, respectively. So dissolution would be maximizing openness, and an organism like literally couldn't keep itself together in on that extreme. And then starvation would be like, the extreme end of closure, where the boundary between you and the environment is as sharp as it could possibly be. And that's also not a way that doesn't allow the organism to sustain itself.
Okay. Yeah, so that's very similar to like you were to think of thermodynamic closeness, like we a lot of times when we think of like the second law of thermodynamics, it's about being a closed system. And so we can see that energy runs down with no input of energy over time. We can measure that, but in a living system, of course, that would just mean that the living system would die because you're not able to get the energy as an input. And in an open system, of course, you get energy as an input. And, I guess what he's saying is that you have to have some agency to get that energy, or to make a decision to get some resource or something like that, which makes sense. Now, I don't necessarily think that it necessarily applies to all of the subconscious things. I mean, clearly, maybe what he means maybe is that the conscious behaviors are coordinating those things in the service of doing this. So if you have a decision making component, it's sort of driving all the other non-conscious behaviors in that direction. And they're kind of thinking of it as this like self-organizing system. So there's no difference between like the conscious, non-conscious components. But then, of course, if you have total openness, you have you don't have any sort of boundaries on that. So it's kind of like just there's no way to manage the organism. Basically, it's like a cell without cell walls or something. I think I drew a diagram of this in a Saturday meeting where I talked about closed systems and open systems and that. And it was just my thoughts on it at the time, but that might be relevant to this view. So I mean that's a little bit more clarifying. Thank you, Amanda.
it reminds me of also the river thing, because opening river analogy is a little more sense in that light too, of like, yes, the river is sort of just this thing that does whatever, but um, in the process of trying to maintain not a starvation or dissolution, you have to. There's that. I was saying words like decision pressure or like I don't know, some kind of pressure. There's a from I guess we're talking about motivation, but I'm thinking like there's some influence on the range of all possible actions for that entity, and the entity thus has to do it too. I am curious about DePaulo on the context of, I feel like as a bit of a side note, I feel like one of the things I think is cool about this, frankly, is I think and I know. Sorry, I'm trying to collect and organize my thoughts somewhat.
Okay.
But one of the things I think is cool is like this is trying to really get at the big primordial differences of like open or closed, existence or not, like the very basis of life, and life being this sort of collected thing. And then trying to, I think basically trying to go up to back up to my scaling comment, like trying to make that more of a fit scale, and like that's why again we're still in the how does Tom think of enactivism, right? Like we're still situating that, but I think there's I'm curious, and I don't know if DePaulo does a lot in this space, but I'm really curious to talk about like there's sort of um, the cost of entry, maybe is the way to talk about it. Like all of anything here, anything that isn't just hurtling towards dissolution or starvation, you're playing the game. Like within the context of the entity playing the game of trying to stay alive, there's a set of things that are happening. Now, an agent can say, okay, I am going to try to lead this predator away from my child. I'm out. I'm saying this is the course I want to take, so my offspring can live, and that happens. Or I'm so deteriorated in my cognitive capacity or whatever, or beat up or wounded, I don't think I have it. So I'm not going to play the game. And I think those are sort of the exit circumstances. But at the level of playing the game, you have this stuff going on. It's like, okay, I see. I'm curious if DePaulo really comments on that, because I'm curious about language for that and sort of the circumstances. Also, my other random tangent is I keep wanting to bring in some Von Forest or Demon stuff in here a little bit too, but I don't really know how I want to do it yet.
Oh yeah, that's definitely connected.
We'll get to that somewhere maybe. I guess I'll make a little note here.
I think we'll probably get to that tomorrow. Also, I haven't read that yet, but when we're talking about Rosen's metabolism repair stuff.
Oh yeah.
I'm very excited that we're talking about metabolism here. I mean, it's mentioned here, and then also in that space, because I feel like that's honestly a really deep-seated I spent a lot of time in some pseudoscience spaces about personality and metabolism, and in some ways it's part of why I'm here now, because I just well, it's got to be more than just this stuff. So that's a nod to Avery and some past stuff, but we'll see where it goes. And we have some more. We do have a little more time today, so we can.
Yeah, there's this bit here in this next paragraph. It talks, or in the paragraph after this, the enactive approach continues to share its commitment. It's after citation 15.
Okay.
To a rejection of representationalist and other homuncular style explanations in biology, but it has distanced itself from an account that reduces all organisms' activity to nothing but the happenings of structural coupling shaped by neutral drift, which is, I guess, I don't know what the different, like, it occupies some central space, but I think it's also, like, there's this whole representation debate in, I think Jesse knows what I mean, where, like, people argue, are there representations, or are there just structures that just kind of, there's this representation that gets, or not even a representation, it's just information that gets laid down and it's persistent, and then maybe it drifts away, representational drift, and you don't have that there anymore. So I mean, it's kind of like there are these two views. One is like the sort of representation, like there's a representation for the body in the homunculus, or that's what the homunculus is. It's just basically where you have a representation of different parts of the body, which is, in the homunculus, that's probably, it's in the motor cortex, actually is a representation of your nerves. The question is that something that you see everywhere in the body? Is there something that everything is mapped to in the brain? Or is it that you just have things that are put in different places and they kind of, they're coherent until they're not, and then that's the way it works. What they're arguing is that it's in between, that there's no type of representation, but that it's persistent no matter what the underlying matter is. So, like, different, whatever cells use this sort of, generate, I guess what you would call the mind, that's not as important as the persistence of that thing. And it's not a representation, it's just this mental activity.
Yeah. So, and and I guess his, like, what, where he's going is, do we need to make room for a genuine role of agency? Yeah. Anything you want to say about that before reading this? But I get what you're saying about the representation stuff, and I guess. But is this all from an account that reduces all organisms' activity to nothing but the happenings of the structural coupling shaped by neutral drift?
It's like if you identified a series of brain regions and they just kind of like, had something there and they were coupled, and you said, okay, this is the brain network. And then sometimes that changes, basically. So there's no real account for, I guess, motivation. I don't really know exactly what they mean by that, but like that's my impression of what it is.
I interpret Tom. Is it Froese?
Yeah, Froese, I guess.
I interpret Froese, given what I've seen here and some of the paper and the commentary I've seen about this, I interpret his situation of enactivism, and I really don't. I feel like ideally I would really have a great sense of enactivism that isn't just Froese's account of it here, and I don't think that I do. But given the account that's here, given what I understand, I feel like it's sort of. I know somewhere in the end that I don't have a great quote. I'm not going to go try to find it again. And then or some of the commentary here in this paper is basically Irruption Theory, and what he's trying to do is, it's quite similar to Fuchs in the sense of when Fuchs is like, I want to make a science that's like not, like, really not reductionist and not dualistic, and like incorporating, both things. And I remember now that I say this, I remember asking several months ago Tom Froese on, like, the Twitter machine. I was asking him, like, hey, like, what's your take on this relative to Thomas Fuchs? He's like, yeah, we're on the same page, but I want to do something more. And I guess we're finally getting to his something more here. And I guess I know that Froese is trying to improve I don't want to say inactive, but improve ways to actually substantially not just have a. I think it says it in the abstract humor, like not just going past the mind and the body are one but not the same, or something like that. He's trying to do a different take on non-dualism in his own way, and I guess it's going to be through agency at this level, something like that.
So it's actually a different kind of dualism.
So, let's see.
I'm still not clear on like how he shows that there's a persistence of mental stuff with this recycling of things. I mean, I'm not. I wonder if that's like a thing that he gives specific examples of, or if it's just kind of this idea that there are different ways of doing things in the anatomy. There's plasticity. There's different structures that you can use, but it's not like just kind of random. Well, I don't. Yeah, I mean, we can get into the. I don't know if we can find that place, but there is a citation by. It's 15. What is 15?
Let's see.
You're trying to get it, yeah.
PDF here. My selection is strange here. Barrett N. The
Oh,
normative turn in enactive theory. That sounds quite interesting because I don't really know what that is. But I mean, I get. We fortunately have very recently read this paper, but and I do remember much around it being very, I guess, anti-teleological, as I said here, and I'm curious. I guess is Tom saying, like this? He's saying, well, we've done it with representationalist stuff, sure, but now we're. I guess he's sort of critiquing this. I guess he's. Well, I don't know. I guess we'll have to read what he finds out. Read to find out what he says about the normative turn. Let me look up the paper too, because I'm curious about that. I don't know if we're going to see much here, but I'm going to read the abstract. Oh, is here? Yeah, sure. That's probably easier to read here. This paper traces the development of enactive concepts of the value of normativity from their roots in the canonical work from Varela through more recent works of Dipolo and others. It aims to show the central importance of these concepts for enactive theory while exposing a potentially troublesome ambiguous definition. Most definitions of enactive normativity are purely proscriptive. But it seems that the enactive theories of cognitive agency and experience demand something more. And this, on the other hand, is not clear that anything other than proscriptive normativity can be made compatible with an active tenet of autonomy and the rejection of representations. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely not, doesn't clarify anything, but it also explains a lot.
Yeah, it presents the question a little more clearly, I suppose.
Well, there's this whole history of science we don't know about because we're just kind of reading this for the first time. But I'm sure there's like, that's another thing. Be interesting to see, like, what are these different strains of enactivism and how do they differ?
Ideally, for next time, I might read the paper or like understand what the normative term really means. I think it's actually actually something I would be extremely interested in, given the circumstantial evidence around it. Very amazing. But let's read this. Has given rise to a vibrant and active research community, which has continued to develop implications of this conception of life, especially by developing extension social domain interactions, citing Dipolo and sense making. Is that Ari?
No,
that's not Ogi.
No,
I don't think so.
Different. Well, yeah. Sorry.
On the other hand, the normative terms also give rise to a series of concerns, okay, which highlight that there is more refinement and better theory. Here we focus on the specific enactive approach to biological intentionalism, sometimes known as autopoietic enactivism. Radical enactivism aims to naturalize an organism's intentional directedness in terms of history of selection. But this move raises its own set of concerns. See this by Abramova.
What exactly do they mean by radical enactivism there?
Let's see. That's the Hutto, I think.
Oh,
Hutto
yeah,
and
yeah.
Mayan, yeah. Basic minds without content.
Ever just let it be.
So go back to the thing in the paper. All right, let's go to this difference here. I think that's good. The autopoietic versus radical enactivism. So what do we know about the difference there? What's the...
Let's compare these two things. Because this is the first one. Well, the previous one. But your question was about...
Go up to the last paragraph. Yeah, up there. So there's autopoietic enactivism and radical enactivism. So this is autopoietic enactivism. And this is sort of a specific enactive approach to biological intentionality. Right.
And wait a second.
And I assume that there's some naturalistic aspect to it, which is what they
Is
need
figure
on.
3 mentioned up here? Sorry. In the text, I don't see figure, like, look at figure 3 for this. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. I don't know how to answer your question.
Well, let's look at the paper, though. Okay, so this is what they're saying. Autopoietic enactivism is what we're talking about in this paper, which is that you're both sort of naturalizing the idea of enactivism, but also, using just kind of what they're describing here. And then radical enactivism, which is a different form of enactivism, aims to naturalize an organism's intentional directedness in terms of a history of selection. But this move raises its own set of concerns. So actually in radical enactivism, they also want to naturalize it. But they view this intentional directedness as a series of selective, so history of selection, which I don't know what that means exactly, but
I'm just gonna take a peek at
maybe
this.
like just kind of selecting behaviors, or
Oops.
it would be interesting. Yeah, look, I don't know what that reference is. I'll look that up and see if. But this move raises its own set of concerns.
Yeah, so this is like a critique of the Hutto paper.
Okay.
So I'm like this little. I can't really make this easier to read. I guess this is better. Hutto and propose it to redefine the problem of naturalizing semantic content as a search for the origin of the content, instead of the attempting to reduce it to some natural phenomenon. The search is to proceed within the framework of relaxed naturalism, which is something also mentioned in the paper, and under the banner of teleosemiotics, which places intentionality at the source of concept. We support the proposed redefinition of the problem, but object to the proposed solution. Strict naturalism. We attempt to show that the first property is not unique to living systems, and therefore it proposes the problem of where to place the demarcation line for the origin of content. And then argue the second property is describe living systems and so on. In conclusion, we suggest that autopoietic theory can not only provide a competitive explanation of the basic responding of the pre-contentful organisms, but also clarify why intentionality is attributed to them in such an intuitive manner. And I have no idea what this word means. Has anyone heard that?
No.
It looks like the old one of the first cities ever, right? The city of
Well, I don't know. Well, look it up, like dash, what that means.
Though.
There's a bunch of stuff on this with respect to enactivism. So, yeah, look up dash and see what it does.
Dash. Oops.
Yeah, just because that, not intention. Well, okay, not that. Onto the okay, no. Earliest, I guess, or original or something.
Yeah, like almost like maybe like proto.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Civilization, which is interesting because of the city. That's cool. Okay, so like not R as in pirate, but as in earliest origins of intentionality. Maybe intentionality is like the not quite basal affectivity, but the intentionality.
Yeah, something. I mean, different fields use different, like, kind of, sometimes you use Latin, sometimes you use other types of notation for these sorts of things. It's very specific to certain fields. But, this is interesting, this apparent or intentionality paper. Go back to that. So this is actually like describing kind of what the issue is here. If you go to the first line of the abstract, so this sort of radical enactivism is, instead of naturalizing it sort of in biology, they're kind of naturalizing it in a different way. It's like searching for the origin of content. Maybe that's why they call it and then that's like relaxing naturalism in this way. So they're looking for like the semiotic aspect of it. I don't really know what that means, source of content, but and in this context especially, because so it says, in conclusion, we suggest that autopoietic theory can not only provide a competitive explanation for the basic responding of pre-contentful organisms. So there's something about the organism that has content, and there's some like original content. Maybe, I don't know if they're thinking of like sort of basic behaviors, or boiling it down to basic behaviors or what. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, this is way beyond what I know.
I'm at the point of the evening where all I can think about is content as in social media content and like influence stuff, and I just like, oh no, and I don't really want to go there with this. So, yes, this is a whole branch of things I'm not that familiar with either. So, I think maybe for next time, as we're almost done with our time here, it might be nice to look at something a little bit about this to understand at least what the turn is. Like I get it at a very high level and probably very low fidelity, whatever is actually being meant. But I think maybe we'll spend 1 minute on like the updated schematic of this primordial tension of self-individualization, highlighting the role of the path that defines plasticity, is now made explicit in the resolution of the tension of these diagrams. So it's like, okay, so we're going from this to now
plasticity. Yes.
With plasticity. Okay. All right. I guess we could think about that for next week. So
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess the idea is there's this process, autopoietic process, that exists between openness and closedness. And then it leads to agency. Then you have to have plasticity in there. I'm not really sure. I don't know. I think if the argument is that like plasticity is driving a lot of this, I mean, I guess it makes sense with learning, but I mean, I don't know. I'd really like to see like some concrete examples of this, or at least some models. Did they mention anything about the artificial life models at the end? I'm just curious. Because I know
let's
that
come to that.
Ikegami, who is an artificial life person, yeah, there we go. So this is
a few things. Let me pull this over here so I can read it. Can I move this? I can't move this over there. And this is still, I think this is still at the top. Oh no, 7 of 19, which is the next, basically the next, get into the next section.
Yeah.
Motivation evolving. And a bunch of like basically 40 through 49 are the references we're seeing for many of them. Okay, so let's just look at those a little bit. But like a lot around here, we've got Road, Mortapalo, Egbert, Beer,
Yeah.
the cognitive domain of a glider in the game of life, Froese, Suki, Evan Thompson. Okay, so I don't know any of those you want to look at, or
Well, I mean, you know, there's of course the Randall Beer paper. It's interesting because it talks about sort of the game of life. So that's one example, at least computationally, of something that we could do. Those are also the protocell structure of ontology is a model protocell. They're like sensory motor systems, which people in A life will talk about from time to time. Certainly, the Bradenburg vehicle is a model of sensory motor feedback loops. And there's how not to model autonomous behavior, which I like. And I don't know if that's because they had negative results or if that's just like do it our way or you're doing it wrong. I don't know.
interesting.
Yeah. But no,
Okay.
this is good stuff. So they talk a lot about homeostasis. They talk about multi-level systems. And they use evolutionary robotics in this paper here. So I don't know which one this is. This is the 2007 paper.
Which
the one that you have up in the browser.
Oh yeah.
Papers.
Okay.
So this is so it's like homeostatic triggers, plasticity and reorganization.
Metadynamics. Interesting.
So we have some examples here of things, and I'm just running through like some of these, just to get a sense of what the practical examples are they're
giving. Okay.
Yeah, when I first read through this, like the survey part, I definitely felt like I just had to be trusting. Like I wasn't. Some of it we're really familiar with. We've read some of these citations, but then specifically the normative turn stuff, I was like, okay, I'll take that at face value for now. So it'll be good to look into it more for next time.
Okay.
I really wonder, like going all the way back to like the original Martini critique of Varela stuff, like is he? I wonder if that critique cites like comments on the normative turn and like saying, I think the critique was more about like, I don't know if it's more embodiment related, and like we didn't focus on the wholeness of the body, or the wholeness of the agent's kind of form. But I'm curious from that end somewhat. But yeah, we're at the top of the hour. So any final thoughts for for today. We can continue this next week for sure. Yeah. Okay. We're basically at the third figure, so we'll continue there next time, and I'll see you all. I guess we're meeting tomorrow too for the cybernetics group, right?
Yeah.
Yes. See you
Awesome.
tomorrow.
Yeah. See you tomorrow.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Take care.
Bye.